Since my wife Adeline disappeared, it's been just me and Charlie, all alone in this old house tucked away in the wilderness. I don't really mind the solitude. I've never been much of a social butterfly anyway. If I had wanted company, I wouldn't have chosen to live so far from civilization. Charlie, my faithful cat, makes occasional stops back home for food, sleep, and to drop off his little treasures from the forest. His visits are enough for me. In the meantime, I fill my days with the company of books and the occasional distraction of television. Adeline, my late wife, had a penchant for mystery novels, and though I never took much interest in them before, I find solace in reading the ones she loved. It's a way to feel close to her again, to remember her fondly. My daughter Sarah often worries about me. She thinks I'm losing my grip on reality up here in the woods, but I assure her that I've never been happier. At 85, I may not be as spry as I used to be, but I'm still sharp as a tack. And if anything really needs fixing, I have the means to reach out for help. But truth be told, I have no intention of leaving this tranquil sanctuary. I'll stay here, surrounded by the whispering trees, until the Lord decides it's my time to go. Sarah's fussing can be a bit much at times. She brings me gadgets, cameras to monitor the outside world, a tablet computer to keep me connected. I appreciate the gesture, though I never asked for these modern contraptions. But they do come in handy, I suppose, making certain tasks a bit easier, even if they weren't exactly what I had in mind for my golden years. Sarah recently asked if I'm bothered by Charlie's prolonged absences, but I'm not. Charlie has always been an outdoor cat, a creature of the forest just like the birds and squirrels. Adeline used to worry about him, fearing he might encounter coyotes or bears. But I trust Charlie's instincts. He's a survivor, and the treasures he brings back from his adventures tell me he's doing just fine out there in the wild. Charlie wasn't exactly in danger during his outings. Occasionally, when he returned home, he'd bring along some trinkets. Sometimes they were just odds and ends like bottle caps or bits of old cans. Other times he'd surprise me with coins, usually small change, but every now and then he'd find something more valuable, like jewelry. Some of it seemed fake, but a few pieces looked quite real. I kept the ones that seemed genuine in a drawer, just in case someone came looking for them. It didn't feel right to sell them. I figured they must have been dropped by hikers in the woods, and Charlie stumbled upon them. Or maybe he was scavenging through some discarded rubbish. Either way, I got the sense that he was keeping himself out of trouble. Some cats might be foolish, but not Charlie. I trusted him more than I trusted most people. Sarah asked if I ever wondered where Charlie went during his adventures. Her curiosity seemed genuine, like she was leading up to something. What Charlie does is his business, I replied. But Sarah persisted, asking if I wasn't even a little bit curious. She then revealed that she'd bought some cameras, the kind people wear when they're biking, to attach to my body. She thought it might be fun and give me something to watch when Charlie returned. I didn't really see the point, but I entertained the idea. Despite thinking it was a bit silly, Sarah had piqued my interest. There was something about her enthusiasm that made me consider it further. And besides, I've never been able to refuse my daughter's requests, especially now that she's turned 50. I guess Charlie tolerated those silly sweaters your mother always dressed him in at Christmas. He'll probably put up with this too, and I don't think it'll hurt him. Trust me, it won't. It'll be fun, I promise. I could hear the excitement in her voice, as if she were a little girl again. She reached into her purse and pulled out the camera, a small gray box. She even brought a harness. The kids will love this too. They always ask about you and Charlie, you know. Oh, I'm sure they do, I replied. The kids must be nearly 20 by now, and I doubted they thought much about what I was up to. But it was kind of her to pretend. Looking at the harness and camera, I couldn't help but think, Charlie won't like this. But I kept that to myself. Besides mildly annoying the poor cat, the idea seemed harmless enough. Maybe we'd even capture something interesting on camera. Sarah showed me how to set everything up and access the video on my own. I caught on moderately quickly. If I got stuck, I could always call her. After chatting a bit longer, she went home, leaving me to my solitude. Charlie hadn't come home yet, but he usually showed up at sundown. So I set everything aside and settled down with a book. At some point, I must have dozed off in my chair. When I woke up, it was dawn, and I saw Charlie sitting on the porch railing outside the window. He meowed and paced around when he saw me moving. I got up, stretched, and shuffled to the door to let him in. He scurried inside and went straight for his food bowl. As he ate, I noticed he'd left something on the deck. In the morning sun, it gleamed brightly. It was a necklace, likely made of real silver. The chain was broken, but the heart-shaped charm looked intact. There were no engravings or signs of ownership. It was probably abandoned, but I still washed it before adding it to the drawer with the rest of Charlie's treasures: old rings, necklaces, earrings, and rare coins. Charlie himself was devouring his food as if he'd never eaten before. I felt a pang of guilt, hoping he hadn't waited too long for his breakfast. I fetched him some wet food, both as an apology and to appease him. I didn't have the energy to deal with his grumpiness. Despite his tough exterior, Charlie was a good cat, always melting like butter in Adeline's hands. She always treated Charlie like a baby, but I saw him more as a grumpy companion to spend the days with. I've never told anyone this, but I always imagined he'd have a bit of a southern drawl if he could talk, sounding a little like John Wayne. As soon as he heard me opening the wet food, he came right over, meowing and demanding his breakfast. I figured it wasn't wise to keep him waiting. I set the bowl down for him on the kitchen table and let him eat while I started on my own breakfast. Charlie took a nap in the armchair Adeline once liked to sit in. I left him be until around noon when I remembered the camera Sarah had bought. I found it in the living room. While I hadn't given much thought to putting it on Charlie before, finding that necklace got me thinking. Where was he getting all that stuff? Was he finding it or stealing it? The camera might answer that. Charlie was sound asleep, so I fetched the camera and read over the instructions again. I recorded a little snippet of him napping on the couch and checked the quality on my computer. It seemed good enough. Might as well make sure the harness fit. Charlie protested a bit when I put the harness on him, but he forgave me, even though he was clearly grumpy. "Sorry, old-timer," I said, scratching him under the chin. I fastened the harness and attached the camera to his chest. "Guess I'll be along for your next adventure, huh?" He just chirped and sniffed my fingers before flopping back down to rest. Within 10 minutes, he was at the back door, ready to go out again. I made sure his camera was on before letting him go. "Happy trails, Pilgrim," I said quietly as he dashed outside. I knew I wouldn't see him again until nightfall. Normally, I'd be in bed by 9, but thinking about Charlie and what I might find on his camera kept me up. The house felt too quiet, so I turned on the TV and poured myself a drink. It had been a while since I indulged, not since Adeline's funeral. We buried an empty casket, no body after 2 months of searching. There wasn't much point in pretending she'd come back. Adeline's mind had stayed sharp over the years, but dementia ran in her family. We saw it happen to her mother, a slow, cruel decline. We both feared it would happen to her too. When we started noticing the signs, neither of us acknowledged it, even when they became too big to ignore. Sarah was over constantly back then, doing what she could to help. Adeline was strong-willed until the end. Sarah suggested retirement homes, but neither of us wanted to go. Adeline wasn't feeble. We'd taken care of ourselves, kept our health into our old age. We even went on walks through the trails behind the house, Putting her in a home where they'd treat her like a child just because she was old and sick wasn't an option. I couldn't do that to her. She was my wife, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Those were the vows, and I'd honor them until death. When I was in my 20s and thinking of proposing, the thought of growing old together terrified me. I wouldn't trade the memories we made together for anything. But back then, the thought of losing Adeline or causing her pain haunted me. Sometimes it would sneak into my mind, but I'd push it away, thinking it was something to worry about later. Then, one morning, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty, and she never returned. The police suggested she might have gone hiking alone, something she'd done when we were younger. I didn't argue. Maybe she woke up, forgot the years had passed, and went out to enjoy the morning air. Perhaps she got lost or injured and was never found. I preferred not to dwell on the details. Not knowing was hard, but it was better than imagining the worst. Sarah was there for me, doting on me. Maybe deep down she feared losing me like she lost Adeline. I sat with my scotch, not really watching the TV. Charlie's movement caught my eye. He paced on the porch, the camera harness still on. I let him in and asked about his adventure, but he went straight for his food. I removed the harness and took the camera off him. It was dirty and the recording had stopped. Sarah mentioned the battery life wasn't great. I doubted I'd miss anything too exciting. I was tired but felt an urgency to watch the footage. Charlie settled into his chair and I made myself a cup of tea before going through the videos on my computer. There were only a few, mostly test videos. The last one seemed almost pitch black, like something was covering the lens. I clicked it, hoping it wasn't damaged. I didn't expect the footage to start, but it did. I could see part of Charlie's head and my own legs in jeans as I turned on the camera. This was just before I let him out, saying, "Happy trails, Pilgrim," before he ventured into the forest. The footage showed Charlie skulking around bushes and tall grass, which looked neat, but not very interesting. He climbed some fallen branches and wandered into a neighbor's yard, where he found some treats they'd left out for him. After indulging a bit, he wandered back into the woods. At one point, I saw him pass the hiking trail Adeline and I used to walk. He walked along a familiar creek as he delved deeper into the forest. The sound of rustling grass and water was annoying, so I lowered the volume. I wondered where he was going, but assumed he was just hunting, maybe for a mouse. The canopy above him darkened as he climbed a fallen birch tree, the bark crinkling under his paws. The tree seemed to lead to a taller one, and despite the time of day, it felt almost like nighttime under the thick canopy. Looking at the video's timestamp, he'd only been out for a bit over an hour. He moved along the branch confidently, like he knew where he was headed. I caught glimpses of something ahead of him, resembling a bird's nest, but much larger. It dominated the top of the tree, looking more like a wall of branches than a nest. It seemed too big and thick for a regular bird to build. One of the branches Charlie climbed seemed to lead toward the nest, and as he got closer, I could have sworn I noticed bits of rope holding some of the larger sticks, or maybe branches, together in the nest. Charlie weaved his way through a gap in the nest, as if he owned the place. The inside was pitch black, and he moved slowly, carefully picking his steps. It was over a minute until there was any light again, making me check if the video had ended, but there was still about half an hour left. Finally, he emerged onto the other side of the wall he passed through. The light inside was scarce, and I could see scattered feathers and shiny objects, tin cans, toys, watches, jewelry. Was this where he'd been getting all that stuff? What was this? A massive crow's nest? I doubted crows would make a nest that large. Charlie paused as if listening, then sniffed some discarded items before casually making his way to the far side. As he walked, I noticed shapes that didn't look like branches, brownish with smooth edges and curves. They had eye sockets. I saw the skull of some large rodent staring emptily from the branches, with bones wrapped in twigs for support. Then, something made my heart race and my stomach churn. Among the bones was a human skull, with matted black hair clinging to the scalp. I recognized that hair. I'd kissed that head 1,000 times. Even in death, I knew it was Adeline. How many others' bones were part of this nest? Oh my God. Charlie sat before Adeline's skull, and I knew he recognized her too. He must have come to mourn, pay his respects, or just be with her even though she was long gone. I prayed that whatever happened to her had occurred after she died. From the wounds and the bone, I feared the worst, that Adeline hadn't died before whatever attacked her. What could have done this? What could have taken her? Charlie sat quietly for almost 10 minutes as I struggled to contain my grief. Then he moved suddenly, startled by a raspy, inhuman hiss that sounded like a mix of a sadistic laugh and a large bird's chatter. Charlie scurried out of sight, and through the gaps in the nest, I saw something else enter. 2 scaled legs with 4-toed claws like a bird of prey. It chittered and approached where Charlie had been. The long black feathers trailing from its body sent shivers down my spine. It inspected the spot where Charlie had been, unfazed by his hiss. I heard the rustling of sticks as Charlie crawled out of the nest, then ran for freedom. The last shot was a blur of the ground as the video ended. Charlie stood in my office doorway, wide-eyed and alert, as if the encounter had frightened him. With a shaking hand, I brought him to me, holding him tight. I'm not sure if he sought protection or provided it, but I was grateful for his company. I haven't told Sarah anything yet. She can never see what I've seen, never know what happened to her mother. But I won't delete the footage. If proof is ever needed, it must be accessible. Should I not return from the woods today, I've retrieved my old rifle from the garage. My old rifle still works fine, and I've got bullets. I'm not sure if I'm still as good a shot as I used to be. Hitting tin cans in the backyard is one thing. Hitting a moving target is another, but I'm sure I'll manage somehow. I can follow the path Charlie took, not exactly, but close enough. I'm confident that if I go into the woods, I can find the nest. I can find whatever horrible thing lives there. And when I do, by God, I will kill it for Adeline.